Chapter 14 of A Voyage to the South Sea. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Voyage to the South Sea by William Bligh, Chapter 14. Proceed in the launch to the island Tofoa. Difficulty in obtaining supplies there. Treacherous attack of the natives. Escape to sea and bear away for New Holland. 1789. April. My first determination was to seek a supply of breadfruit and water at Tofoa, and afterwards to sail for Tonga and there risk a solicitation to Poulaho, the king, to equip our boat and grant us a supply of water and provisions, so as to enable us to reach the East Indies. The quantity of provisions I found in the boat was 150 pounds of bread, 16 pieces of pork, each piece weighing 2 pounds, 6 quarts of rum, 6 bottles of wine, with 28 gallons of water, and 4 empty barbacoas. Fortunately, it was calm all the afternoon till about 4 o'clock, when we were so far to windward that, with a moderate easterly breeze which sprung up, we were able to sail. It was nevertheless dark when we got to Tofoa, where I expected to land, but the shore proved to be so steep and rocky that we were obliged to give up all thoughts of it and keep the boat under the lee of the island with 2 oars, for there was no anchorage. Having fixed on this mode of proceeding for the night, I served to every person half a pint of grog, and each took to his rest as well as our unhappy situation would allow. Wednesday, 29. In the morning at dawn of day we rowed along shore in search of a landing place, and about 10 o'clock we discovered a cove with a stony beach at the northwest part of the island, where I dropped the grapple within 20 yards of the rocks. A great surf ran on the shore, but, as I was unwilling to diminish our stock of provisions, I landed Mr. Samuel and some others, who climbed the cliffs and got into the country to search for supplies. The rest of us remained at the cove, not discovering any other way into the country than that by which Mr. Samuel had proceeded. It was great consolation to me to find that the spirits of my people did not sink, notwithstanding our miserable and almost hopeless situation. Towards noon Mr. Samuel returned with a few quarts of water which he had found in holes, but he had met with no spring or any prospect of a sufficient supply in that particular, and had seen only the signs of inhabitants. As it was uncertain what might be our future necessities, I only issued a morsel of bread and a glass of wine to each person for dinner. I observed the latitude of this cove to be 19 degrees 41 minutes south. This is the northwest part of Tofoa, the northwesternmost of the Friendly Islands. The weather was fair, but the wind blew so strong from the east-southeast that we could not venture to sea. Our detention made it absolutely necessary to endeavour to obtain something towards our support, for I was determined if possible to keep our first stock entire. We therefore weighed and rowed along shore to see if anything could be got, and at last discovered some coconut trees, but they were on top of high precipices and the surf made a dangerous landing. Both one and the other, however, we got the better of. Some of the people with much difficulty climbed the cliffs and got about 20 coconuts, and others flung them to ropes, by which we hauled them through the surf into the boat. This was all that could be done here, and as I found no place so safe as the one we had left to spend the night at, I returned to the cove and, having served a coconut to each person, we went to rest again in the boat. Thursday, 30. At daylight we attempted to put to sea, but the wind and weather proved so bad that I was glad to return to our former station, where, after issuing a morsel of bread and a spoonful of rum to each person, we landed, and I went off with Mr. Nelson, Mr. Samuel, and some others, into the country, having hauled ourselves up the precipice by long vines which were fixed there by the natives for that purpose, this being the only way into the country. We found a few deserted huts and a small plantain walk but little taken care of, from which we could collect only 3 small bunches of plantains. After passing this place we came to a deep gully that led towards a mountain near a volcano, and, as I conceived that in the rainy season very great torrents of water must pass through it, we hoped to find sufficient for our use remaining in some holes of the rocks; but after all our search the hole that we collected was only 9 gallons. We advanced within 2 miles of the foot of the highest mountain in the island, on which is the volcano that is almost constantly burning. The country near it is covered with lava and has a most dreary appearance. As we had not been fortunate in our discoveries and saw nothing to alleviate our distresses except the plantains and water above mentioned, we returned to the boat exceedingly fatigued and faint. When I came to the precipice whence we were to descend into the cove, I was seized with such a dizziness in my head that I thought it scarce possible to effect it; however, by the assistance of Nelson and others, they at last got me down in a weak condition. Every person being returned by noon, I gave about an ounce of pork and 2 plantains to each, with half a glass of wine. I have again observed the latitude of this place 19 degrees 41 minutes south. The people who remained by the boat I directed to look for fish or what they could pick up about the rocks, but nothing edible could be found; so that upon the whole we considered ourselves on as miserable a spot of land as could well be imagined. I could not say positively from the former knowledge I had of this island whether it was inhabited or not, but I knew it was considered inferior to the other islands, and I was not certain but that the Indians only resorted to it at particular times. I was very anxious to ascertain this point for, in case there had been only a few people here, and those could have furnished us with but very moderate supplies, the remaining in this spot to have made preparations for our voyage would have been preferable to the risk of going amongst multitudes, where perhaps we might lose everything. A party therefore sufficiently strong I determined should go another route as soon as the sun became lower, and they cheerfully undertook it. About 2 in the afternoon the party set out, but, after suffering much fatigue, they returned in the evening without any kind of success. At the head of the cove, about 150 yards from the waterside, there was a cave. The distance across the stony beach was about 100 yards, and from the country into the cove there was no other way than that which I have already described. The situation secured us from the danger of being surprised, and I determined to remain on shore for the night with a part of my people, that the others might have more room to rest in the boat with the master, whom I directed to lie at a grapple and be watchful in case we should be attacked. I ordered 1 plantain for each person to be boiled, and having supped on this scanty allowance with 1/4 pint of grog, and fixed the watches for the night, those whose turn it was laid down to sleep in the cave, before which we kept up a good fire, yet notwithstanding we were much troubled with flies and mosquitoes. May, Friday, 1. At dawn of day the party set out again in a different route to see what they could find, in the course of which they suffered greatly for want of water. They however met with 2 men, a woman, and a child. The men came with them to the cove and brought 2 coconut shells of water. I endeavoured to make friends of these people and sent them away for breadfruit, plantains, and water. Soon after other natives came to us, and by noon there were 30 about us, from whom we obtained a small supply, but I could only afford 1 ounce of pork and 1/4 breadfruit to each man for dinner, with half a pint of water, for I was fixed in my resolution not to use any of the bread or water in the boat. No particular chief was yet among the natives; they were notwithstanding tractable, and behaved honestly, exchanging the provisions they brought for a few buttons and beads. The party who had been out informed me of their having seen several neat plantations, so that it remained no longer a doubt of there being settled inhabitants on the island, for which reason I determined to get what I could, and to sail the first moment that the wind and weather would allow us to put to sea. I was much puzzled in what manner to account to the natives for the loss of my ship. I knew they had too much sense to be amused with the story that the ship was to join me, for she was not in sight from the hills. I was at first doubtful whether I should tell the real fact or say that the ship had overset and sunk and that we only were saved. The latter appeared to be the most proper and advantageous for us, and I accordingly instructed my people that we might all agree in one story. As I expected, inquiries were made about the ship, and they seemed readily satisfied with our account, but there did not appear to be the least symptom of joy or sorrow in their faces, though I fancied I discovered some marks of surprise. Some of the natives were coming and going the whole afternoon, and we got enough of breadfruit, plantains, and coconuts for another day, but of water they brought us only about 5 pints. A canoe also came in with 4 men and brought a few coconuts and breadfruit, which I bought as I had done the rest. Nails were much inquired after, but I would not suffer any to be shown, as they were wanted for the use of the boat. Towards evening I had the satisfaction to find our stock of provisions somewhat increased, but the natives did not appear to have much to spare. What they brought was in such small quantities that I had no reason to hope we should be able to procure from them sufficient to stock us for our voyage. At sunset all the natives left us in quiet possession of the cove. I thought this was a good sign, and made no doubt that they would come again the next day with a better supply of food and water, with which I hoped to sail without further delay. For if in attempting to get to Tongataboo we should be driven to leeward of the islands, there would be a larger quantity of provisions to support us against such a misfortune. At night I served a quarter of a breadfruit and a coconut to each person for supper, and, a good fire being made, all but the watch went to sleep. Saturday, 2. At daybreak the next morning I was pleased to find everyone's spirits a little revived, and that they no longer regarded me with those anxious looks which had constantly been directed towards me since we lost sight of the ship. Every countenance appeared to have a degree of cheerfulness, and they all seemed determined to do their best. As there was no certainty of our being supplied with water by the natives, I sent a party among the gullies in the mountains with empty shells to see what could be found. In their absence the natives came about us as I expected, and in greater numbers. 2 canoes also came in from round the north side of the island. In one of these was an elderly chief called Makaawa. Soon after some of our foraging party returned, and with them came a good-looking chief called Eegeeafo, or perhaps more properly Eefo Eig or Ehee, signifying a chief. To each of these men I made a present of an old shirt and a knife, and I soon found that they had either seen me or heard of my being at Annamooka. They knew I had been with Captain Cook, who they inquired after, and also Captain Clerk. They were very inquisitive to know in what manner I had lost my ship. During this conversation a young man named Nagaete appeared, whom I remembered to have seen at Annamooka. He expressed much pleasure at our meeting. I inquired after Poulaho and Feeno, who they said were at Tongataboo, and Eefo agreed to accompany me thither if I would wait till the weather moderated. The readiness and affability of this man gave me much satisfaction. This, however, was but of short duration, for the natives began to increase in number, and I observed some symptoms of a design against us. Soon after they attempted to haul the boat on shore, on which I brandished my cutlass in a threatening manner and spoke to Eefo to desire them to desist, which they did, and everything became quiet again. My people, who had been in the mountains, now returned with about 3 gallons of water. I kept buying up the little breadfruit that was brought to us, and likewise some spears to arm my men with, having only 4 cutlasses, 2 of which were in the boat. As we had no means of improving our situation, I told our people I would wait till sunset, by which time perhaps something might happen in our favour. For if we attempted to go at present we must fight our way through, which we could do more advantageously at night, and that in the meantime we would endeavour to get off to the boat what we had bought. The beach was lined with the natives, and we heard nothing but the knocking of stones together which they had in each hand. I knew very well this was the sign of an attack. At noon I served a coconut and a breadfruit to each person for dinner, and gave some to the chiefs, with whom I continued to appear intimate and friendly. They frequently importuned me to sit down, but I as constantly refused, for it occurred both to Nelson and myself that they intended to seize hold of me if I gave them such an opportunity. Keeping therefore constantly on our guard, we were suffered to eat our uncomfortable meal in some quietness. After dinner we began by little and little to get our things into the boat, which was a troublesome business on account of the surf. I carefully watched the motions of the natives, who continued to increase in number, and found that, instead of their intention being to leave us, fires were made, and places fixed on for their stay during the night. Consultations were also held among them, and everything assured me we would be attacked. I sent orders to the master that when he saw us coming down he should keep the boat close to the shore that we might more readily embark. I had my journal on shore with me, writing the occurrences in the cave, and on sending it down to the boat it was nearly snatched away but for the timely assistance of the gunner. The sun was near setting when I gave the word, on which every person who was on shore with me boldly took up his proportion of things and carried them to the boat. The chiefs asked me if I would not stay with them all night. I said, "No, I never sleep out of my boat, but in the morning we will again trade with you, and I shall remain till the weather is moderate that we may go, as we have agreed, to see Poulaho at Tongataboo." Maka'akavau then got up and said, "You will not sleep on shore? Then Mati," which directly signifies we will kill you, and he left me. The onset was now preparing. Everyone, as I had described before, kept knocking stones together, and Eefo quitted me. All but 2 or 3 things were in the boat, when I took Nageete by the hand and we walked down the beach, everyone in a silent kind of horror. While I was seeing the people embark, Nageete wanted me to speak to Eefo, but I found he was encouraging them to the attack, and it was my determination, if they had then begun, to have killed him for his treacherous behaviour. I ordered the carpenter not to quit me till the other people were in the boat. Nageete, finding I would not stay, loosed himself from my hold and went off, and we all got into the boat except one man, who, while I was getting on board, quitted it and ran up the beach to cast the stern fast off, notwithstanding the master and others called him to return while they were hauling me out of the water. I was no sooner in the boat than the attack began by about 200 men. The unfortunate poor man who had run up the beach was knocked down, and the stones flew like a shower of shot. Many Indians got hold of the stern rope and were near hauling the boat on shore, which they would certainly have effected if I had not had a knife in my pocket with which I cut the rope. We then hauled off to the grapnel, everybody being more or less hurt. At this time I saw 5 of the natives about the poor man they had killed, and 2 of them were beating him about the head with stones in their hands. We had no time to reflect, for to my surprise they filled their canoes with stones, and 12 men came off after us to renew the attack, which they did so effectually as nearly to disable us all. Our grapnel was foul, but Providence here assisted us. The fluke broke and we got to our oars and pulled to sea. They, however, could paddle round us, so that we were obliged to sustain the attack without being able to return it, except with such stones as lodged in the boat, and in this I found we were very inferior to them. We could not close because our boat was lumbered and heavy, of which they knew how to take advantage. I therefore adopted the expedients of throwing overboard some clothes, which, as I expected, they stopped to pick up, and, as it was by this time almost dark, they gave over the attack and returned towards the shore, leaving us to reflect on our unhappy situation. The poor man killed by the natives was John Norton. This was the second voyage with me as a quartermaster, and his worthy character made me lament his loss very much. He has left an aged parent, I am told, whom he supported. I once before sustained an attack of a similar nature with a smaller number of Europeans against a multitude of Indians. It was after the death of Captain Cook on the Morai at Owyhee, where I was left by Lieutenant King. Yet notwithstanding this experience, I had not an idea that the power of a man's arm could throw stones from 2 to 8 pounds weight with such force and exactness as these people did. Here, unhappily, we were without firearms, which the Indians knew, and it was a fortunate circumstance that they did not begin to attack us in the cave, for in that case our destruction must have been inevitable, and we should have had nothing left for it but to sell our lives as dearly as we could, in which I found everyone cheerfully disposed to concur. This appearance of resolution deterred them, supposing that they could effect their purpose without risk after we were in the boat. Taking this as a sample of the disposition of the natives, there was but little reason to expect much benefit by persevering in the attempt of visiting Poulaho, for I considered their good behaviour formerly to have proceeded from a dread of our firearms, and which therefore was likely to cease, as they knew we were now destitute of them, and even supposing our lives not in danger, the boat and everything we had would most probably be taken from us, and therefore all hopes precluded of ever being able to return to our native country. We set our sails and steered along shore by the west side of the island Tofoa, the wind blowing fresh from the eastward. My mind was employed in considering what was best to be done when I was solicited by all hands to take them towards home, and when I told them that no hopes of relief for us remained, except what might be found at New Holland, till I came to Timor, a distance of full 1,200 leagues, where there was a Dutch settlement, but in what part of the island I knew not. They all agreed to live on 1 ounce of bread and 1/4 of a pint of water per day. Therefore, after examining our stock of provisions and recommending to them in the most solemn manner not to depart from their promise, we bore away across the sea where the navigation is but little known, in a small boat 23 feet long from stem to stern, deep laden with 18 men. I was happy, however, to see that everyone seemed better satisfied with our situation than myself. Our stock of provisions consisted of about 150 pounds of bread, 28 gallons of water, 20 pounds of pork, 3 bottles of wine, and 5 quarts of rum. The difference between this and the quantity we had on leaving the ship was principally owing to our loss in the bustle and confusion of the attack. A few coconuts were in the boat, and some breadfruit, but the latter was trampled to pieces. End of chapter 14.